So in this video, I'm going to cover the basics of Spanish that is required for a beginner. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 16 and fluent in 4 languages, including Spanish. I got fluent in Spanish in 120 hours of studying after the summer of 2022 at 13 years old. And now I help obsessed Spanish learners reach conversation fluency using my simple methods. Here's my quick before and after.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
So starting off, I just want to talk about what this video is and is not. You know, 90% of the people that watch these videos, the viral videos of the top 10 phrases in Spanish you need to know and all these things, okay? In fact, if you search up this exact title, you're going to find those types of videos. This video is not that type of video, okay? You can see these things that we're going to cover are not memorizing phrases, and there's a reason why, and it's because when it comes to content on Spanish learning, there are 3 categories. The entertainment type of content, edutainment, which is like educational but mostly entertainment, and then education. This channel is purely strictly education, meaning most of the people already clicked off because they're not actually here for education, they're here for entertainment. I just want to filter out the people who aren't going to benefit. If you're here because you're here to memorize some phrases in Spanish, you might as well just give up learning Spanish by now. Because most of the people are like that, and we know that most people don't actually get fluent in Spanish when they want to get fluent in Spanish. In fact, let me tell you a quick story. Before the summer of 2022, where I decided to actually spend time every day during the summer of 2022 to reach fluency, one of my friends was actually supposed to do with me. We both decided on that goal together, and we'll call him Bob. And Bob was exactly the kind of guy who would watch those videos where it would be like top 10 phrases you need to memorize, or you need to know basically, but they basically teach you to memorize. And so he would watch those videos, and as soon as summer started, he gave up on learning Spanish. Because learning in general, no matter what it is, okay, in this case, learning Spanish, learning is all about education. And so anything that isn't purely educational is mostly a waste of time. In fact, generally speaking, every single piece of content that is about learning Spanish that isn't purely educational is generally a waste of time. So videos like these where I tell you to memorize all these phrases, they're not good for learning Spanish, because if you're here to reach conversational fluency, you're here to actually, actually learn Spanish in your brain. In English, would you say you're fluent in English if you're able to say a few phrases here and there and then nothing else? Of course not. So this channel is specifically for people who want to reach conversational fluency as fast as possible, which is what I've achieved and I've helped others achieve. So this video is educational, it's not entertaining, and it's for people who want to reach conversational fluency, not for people who want to just memorize phrases, okay? Now let's get into the perfect Spanish accent, aka vowels. So in English, okay, let's take the word normal. So whenever we're trying to pronounce a word in Spanish, which is, by the way, the base level, okay, we're always going to start at the base level. The concept that applies for every single word in the entire Spanish language is exactly how the words are pronounced, the words are said. If you don't say words the way they're supposed to be pronounced, you're just going to end up sounding like an American. When you speak in Spanish, if you pronounce it like an American, it's just going to sound like English. It's like that one song, if you've heard of that one song. It's a song about how English sounds like to non-Americans or non-English speakers. And it was literally, the song was like literally nothing. It was literally gibberish, but it sounded American, it sounded like English because of the American accent that the guy put on. And so the same thing applies. If you speak in a heavy English accent or American accent, then you're definitely not going to sound like Spanish, and people are going to really struggle understanding you. And so the core fundamental concept in Spanish is vowels. So vowels are, technically they're called open mouth sounds. They're basically sounds that make the word a word. So the vowels are A, E, I, O, U. Those are the vowels in English and in Spanish. So here you can see we have O and A. Okay, now in English, words are pronounced differently based on what the context is, right? There's tons of silent letters. There are, for example, here we have O and A, but it's not pronounced no mar, no nor mal, right? It's pronounced normal. And so A isn't pronounced A nor male. It's not. It's pronounced all. So in English, it's very dynamic. In Spanish, every single word is pronounced exactly how it is written. And so that's one thing about Spanish which makes it much easier. In fact, a lot of the times you're going to know Spanish is actually a super easy language compared to English. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, here we have the vowels. Now the vowels in Spanish are pronounced, for A is pronounced like A, E is pronounced like E, I is pronounced like I, O is pronounced like O, and U is pronounced like U. A, E, I, U, O. A, E, I, O, U. Okay? A good way to sort of get these down is to Either imagine you're like a monkey, which is a simple one. A, e, I, u, o. So take the vowel like o and just try to say like a monkey, like o, 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 o. I know it seems very silly, but if you ever struggle with this, that is a sure way to get him down. Another one is to imagine them as laughs. So for example, A is ah. So you can imagine ha 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 ha. And then you get rid of the H. Ah 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 ah. For example, the letter O. Ho 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 ho. And you can imagine that and get rid of the H. O o o o. So how do you think you'd pronounce the word normal in Spanish? Well, first you want to start off the vowels. So we have two vowels here. We have O and A. Or in Spanish, that would be O, A. So that's the first step. Try to pronounce it like that. O, A. Once you've gotten that down, then you can start adding the consonants, basically the other letters. So, normal. And that's exactly how you pronounce it. The word for formal is the exact same. So how do you think you pronounce formal in Spanish? Formal. Very simple. If we took a word like, the word for I speak in Spanish is, in English, this would be pronounced hablo. How do you think you'd pronounce this in Spanish? So again, you start with the vowels. O. So it would be hablo. And the H in Spanish is completely silent. Now, Spanish does have a few, small things, like the H's are silent, the J's are pronounced like H's, the G sometimes can be pronounced like H's or like a H. There's an extra letter which is called ñ, which is basically ny. So those are small things. We're not going to cover those because they're not as important. Vowels are the most important concept in Spanish. If you don't have vowels, you basically can't speak Spanish. If I took a sentence like, es que hay muchos problemas, and then firstly, I didn't pronounce it like a native, so I said, es que hay muchos problemas, and then I said it with the English vowels. Es que hay muchos problemas. Not Spanish anymore. That's another language. Okay, so now let's talk about the Spanish language structure, the whole structure of Spanish. So anytime you create a sentence in Spanish, there's always going to be two aspects. And this is covering it in the 3 W's. I call them the 3 W's. It's the what and the where. In any Spanish sentence, you're going to need what the words are and then where the words are placed. So basically the order of those words. So if we had something very simple, right? What's your name? Okay, in Spanish, this would be, now most of these videos online, they just tell you to memorize these phrases, ¿Cómo te llamas? Okay, so if you did that, you have now learned the what and the where. But this doesn't reflect the Spanish structure of, like the actual structure of the language, okay? Because the language isn't memorizing phrases, okay? Now, the what is just, you know the word como, you know the word te, you know the word llamas. And where is, you know the order of where these are placed, okay? Now, you might have noticed that these are only 2 W's, and there's a third W here that isn't required, but it gives you leverage. It basically, most people only learn the 2 W's. They memorize phrases like como te llamas. They don't understand the why. And we're going to get to that in the third W. Now, the Spanish structure, like the structure of the language, goes like this. There's basically always a verb. Now, a verb is something that you do, something that you can put to before of. So you can't say to laptop, but you can say to fall. You can say to speak, etc. Another way to think about verbs, a simple trick, is can you put ing at the end of it? So you can't say, I don't know, protein-ing, right? Protein-ing isn't a verb. You can't protein something, right? Protein is a noun. It's a thing. And so you can't do that for protein because protein isn't a verb then, right? However, you can do it for run, right? Running. Running is a word. And so basically most of us know what verbs are. That's just a very simple explanation. Now, the way verbs work in Spanish is either someone does a verb or someone is receiving that verb done to them. And that someone doesn't have to be a person. It could be any pronoun, basically meaning it could be an it as well. It could be an object. So for example, to see is a verb, right? If I said I see, that is someone doing the verb, right? And it's me. I am doing the verb. And if I said I see it, then it is the one that's receiving the verb. Meaning for every person in a sentence, there's only two, technically 3, but there's only 2 pronouns of that person. If you've ever seen in like Instagram or I don't know, Tinder, or there's like these bios, basically a biography where people write their pronouns. And so pronouns are, for example, if we had, for the pronouns for a feminine person would be she/her. And so technically there's one more, which is her in the sense of her house, etc. So technically there's 3, but for the sake of like Spanish structure, it's not actually used. And it's not used in any structure either. So she or her. Now you can see here that these two perfectly align with who is doing the verb and who receives the verb. So you would never say her see she. You would say she sees her, right? So you can see that this replaces this, and this one replaces this one. So the Spanish structure works like this, where pronouns like she or he or they, etc., are the ones doing the verb, and then pronouns that receive the verb, like them, like her, like him, are the ones that receive the verb, okay? And the way this works in Spanish is the person that does the verb, this person, is determined by what you change about the verb, okay? So verbs in Spanish have 3 different verb endings. Verbs in Spanish can either end in ar, or ir. And there's 2 groups, the ar group and then the erir group. Meaning depending on the group of the verb will change according to that. And in Spanish, conjugation is just taking off the verb ending, depending on what group it's in, and then replacing it with something else. Or it could also be adding something to any verb, depending on the tense. We're not going to go through all that because those aren't required. All you need to understand is there are 3 verb endings and 2 verb groups, and verbs will change based on their verb groups. And you change verbs in order to change who is doing the verb. So if we took the verb to speak, which is hablar, if you wanted to say that I speak, in Spanish, you don't put an I at the beginning. Instead, you take off the verb ending, which is ar in this case, and because it falls into the ar group, the rule is that you take off the ar and put o for the present tense. So it becomes o, so hablo, and that means I speak. Now, if you want to, you could clarify that it's I speak by adding the word yo. But this is not what natives do, and most natives just directly say hablo. This is a clarification, which isn't required. So this isn't required. You just have to basically take the verb, depending on the verb group. So if the verb ends in ir, for example, then it falls into the erir group. And then depending on that, you will make a conclusion of what you take off or add. And that is the basic premise of the language, okay? So the reason why I'm teaching it to you in this way is what I like to call the 3 W's. Most people find grammar extremely hard and excruciating, and it's because they don't do what we just did now, which is understanding the why. Now, I've told you before, in any Spanish sentence, there are 2 parts, what the words are and where the words are placed. Most people memorize the what and the where, and therefore it doesn't make sense. So think, for example, ¿cómo estás? Or ¿cómo te llamas? Or ¿cuál es tu nombre? Or all these different phrases that everyone throws around and memorizes. Everyone knows the what and the where. Everyone has memorized that it's como and then estás. It's not estás como, it's como estás. But the reason why they struggle with grammar and in Spanish in general is that they don't understand the why behind that language. They don't understand how you got to, for example, ¿cómo te llamas? And now you can actually understand how we got to ¿cómo te llamas? Llamas comes from the verb llamar, which is an ar verb. So we take off the ar and put as in order to conjugate it to make it you call. Te is the person receiving the verb, and it's you, and it can mean you, to you, or yourself. And como means how. So literally, it means como te llamas means how do you call yourself. And so the person who memorized como te llamas, just like that, versus the person who understood the why behind como te llamas, like we just went through with the Spanish structure, the person who has done that will now know a million variations of como te llamas, and that is the difference. Because when you understand why certain things happen, then it makes more sense. And when it makes more sense, you remember it better. And it doesn't mean that you remember the actual sentence better. It means you remember the concept better. And the reason why that matters is because understanding a concept is like a cheat code. Because understanding a concept means you have spent 1 unit of learning and you've got out 100. What this means is vowels, for example. You just learned vowels in this video, right? Vowels apply to every single sentence in Spanish. Like, this number could have an infinite number of zeros, technically. Every single possible sentence in Spanish will have vowels, which means the time you spent learning vowels is infinitely more valuable than the time you spent memorizing a sentence. Or, for example, every single Spanish sentence, basically, will have verbs. And so, instead of memorizing a conjugation of a verb like llamas, like, como te llamas, or estás, if you understood the logic behind those by understanding the groups and by understanding that there's verb endings and the groups of those and the rules behind how you get to there, it means that not only do you know llamas, but you also know hablas and llegas and presentas, etc. In that case, you would know hundreds of different variations for 1 unit of memorization or learning. Whereas the person who just memorizes everything will put 1 unit of memorization or learning and get out 1 unit. And so then this scale isn't high leverage anymore. You're literally putting 1 for 1. So you have no more leverage anymore. And that's why it's so important. Understanding the logic and why behind Spanish sentences gives you leverage, meaning the amount of input you put in, you get way more output out of it. Okay? This video can be watched 1,000,000 times. Whereas if I just presented this presentation in front of a group of people, then it was only 20 people could see it maybe. But because this is a video, hundreds of people can see it. And that's the difference that leverage makes. Social media has more leverage than a classroom, for example, for that reason. And so understanding how to build sentences, understand if you were to build a building, do you ever have the blueprint for the building or not? You would want to have the blueprint for the building because the blueprint is what is required for you to consistently be able to replicate those buildings. And so even if someone built a building without the blueprint, not only is the building probably super bad, but they definitely cannot replicate that building 1,000,000 times over. Whereas the person who has the blueprint will not only make the correct buildings, but also be able to replicate those buildings 1,000,000 times again. And that's the same concept. The person who understands the blueprint behind Spanish sentences, aka, the verb endings, all that, is the person who will be able to repeat those sentences 1,000,000 times over in 1,000,000 different variations because they've understood the logic, the blueprint, the process. Whereas the person who memorizes phrases in Spanish probably won't even be able to create a correct sentence. And even if the sentence is correct, they won't be able to replicate a different variation of that sentence. And that is why understanding the why is so crucial when learning Spanish. And so those are all the basics you need for learning Spanish. Yes, all the basics. You just need to understand vowels, and then you need to understand the structure of the language. Now you have full permission to go out and learn the actual rules. Learn, okay, what are the rules for adverbs? What are the rules for adverbs? How would I create a sentence using these concepts, etc. And I have other videos on my channel explaining exactly how to do that. Finally, let's end off with a free gift. So you can check the description or the pinned comment to grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet where you'll instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words, and it's no email needed, no need to opt in. It's just free and it's yours just as a thank you gift for watching to the end of this video. And that Cognate cheat sheet will explain the blueprint to unlocking those thousands of Spanish words, whereas the person who memorizes those thousands of Spanish words. So you'll put in like 13 units of learning and you'll get out thousands of words in exchange. A pretty good ROI, if you ask me. And if you want my help in implementing these frameworks and finally start learning Spanish in a clear and structured way, then you check the description to join my program. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate it if you shared this video with someone who you think would benefit. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed and stay humble.